TIFU husband called me names, so I got him disinherited from his family. TIFU by destroying my husband's inheritance and maybe his entire life. I'm sitting in my car outside a divorce lawyer's office right now, and I think I might have just ruined someone's life forever. Not might have, I definitely did. The question is whether he deserved it, or if I'm actually a monster. 3 days ago, I was married to David, a man I thought I knew. We'd been together for 5 years, married for 3, and I genuinely believed we were happy. Sure, we had our problems, what couple doesn't? But I thought we were solid. His family loved me, or at least I thought they did. His parents, Margaret and Robert, are old money wealthy, the kind of people who summer in the Hamptons and winter in Aspen. They'd always been polite to me, if a bit formal, but I figured that was just their way. Everything changed last Saturday night at his brother's birthday party. I'd gone upstairs to use the bathroom at Kevin's house when I heard voices from the study down the hall. The door was cracked open, and I recognized David's laugh immediately. He was in there with Kevin and a few of his college buddies, probably having one of their bourbon and cigar sessions that always ran too long. I was about to walk past when I heard my name. Seriously though, how do you deal with Sarah being so clingy? One of them was saying. She seems like the type to check your phone. David's response made my blood freeze. Oh, she's definitely the ball and chain type. I swear, sometimes I feel like I'm married to my mother. She's constantly nagging about money, about my schedule, about everything. And don't get me started on how she's let herself go since the wedding. They all laughed. They actually laughed. But it got worse. Remember when she had that miscarriage last year? David continued, and my hand flew to my mouth. Honestly, it was probably a blessing. Can you imagine having to deal with her being even more emotional and needy? Plus, we couldn't afford a kid anyway with her spending habits. I had to grip the wall to keep from falling over. The miscarriage that had devastated me for months, that had nearly destroyed our marriage because I thought David was being distant when actually he was just relieved. Kevin chimed in, Mom and Dad have no idea what she's really like, do they? They think she's this sweet, innocent girl. God, no, David said. They'd probably write me out of the will if they knew I agreed with them about her being beneath our family. But hey, I can fake it for a few more years until they kick the bucket, then I'll have enough money to do whatever I want. I stood there in that hallway for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, listening to my husband and his brother tear apart every intimate detail of our marriage. My appearance, apparently I was chunky now. My intelligence, I was book smart but no common sense. My family background, trailer trash trying to marry up. When I finally made it back downstairs, Margaret smiled at me and asked how I was feeling. You look a bit pale, dear. I smiled back and told her I was fine, just a little tired. But inside, something had shifted. Something had broken that I knew couldn't be fixed. And that's when I remembered something David didn't know I knew about. The credit cards. The gambling. The lies. See, David thought he was so clever, but I'd been handling our taxes for 3 years. I knew about the secret accounts, the debts, the casino receipts he thought he'd hidden. I'd kept quiet because I thought we were partners. But apparently, we weren't partners at all. I was just the ball and chain. That Sunday morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. David was still asleep beside me, snoring softly, completely oblivious to the fact that his world was about to implode. I made coffee, sat at our kitchen table, and spread out 3 years' worth of financial documents. It was worse than I'd even realized. David hadn't just been gambling, he'd been systematically lying to his parents about everything. The successful investment portfolio he bragged about to his father? Casino losses totaling $180,000. The business loan he told them he'd paid off early? Still accruing interest at 18% APR. The charitable donations he'd claimed on our taxes to impress Margaret, who sat on the board of several nonprofits. Fabricated. But the piece that made my hands shake was a text thread I found on the iPad we shared. Messages between David and his cousin Jake, dating back 2 years. Asterisk David, the prenup was genius. When I'm ready to upgrade, she gets nothing. Asterisk. Asterisk Jake, what if she finds out about Vegas? Asterisk. Asterisk David, she won't. And even if she did, what's she gonna do? Run to mommy and daddy? They already think she's not good enough for me. Asterisk. Asterisk Jake, your parents really buying the whole devoted husband act. Asterisk. Asterisk David, please. Dad's already talking about updating the will to include provisions for our future children. If only he knew I'd been secretly getting the SNP consultation. Sarah thinks we're trying naturally, lol asterisk. The vasectomy consultation. While I'd been blaming myself for not getting pregnant again after the miscarriage, wondering if something was wrong with me, scheduling fertility appointments that David always found excuses to miss, he'd been actively preventing it. I screenshot everything. By the time David stumbled into the kitchen around noon, hungover and grumpy, I had compiled a comprehensive file of his deception. Bank statements, credit reports, text messages, even photos of casino receipts I'd found in his jacket pockets over the years. Morning, babe, he mumbled, kissing my cheek like nothing had changed. How was the rest of the party last night? You seemed quiet on the drive home. I smiled and handed him coffee. It was enlightening. Your mom invited me to lunch this week, actually. Just the 2 of us. David paused, cup halfway to his lips. Oh yeah? What for? She wants to discuss holiday plans. Maybe talk about our future. I watched his face carefully. She mentioned something about family investments, making sure we're financially secure. Relief flooded his features. That's great, honey. You know how much my parents adore you. The casual lie rolled off his tongue so easily. Even now, even after everything I'd heard, he was still performing. David, I said, keeping my voice level, is there anything you think I should know before I talk to your mother? Anything about our finances or our plans? A flash of something, panic? Crossed his face before he recovered. No, why would there be? We're solid, Sarah. You worry too much. He left for his golf game 20 minutes later, whistling. I waited until his car disappeared down our street, then picked up my phone and dialed Margaret. Mrs. Whitmore? It's Sarah. About that lunch, could we make it today instead? There's something important I need to discuss with you and Robert. Something about David that I think you need to know. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Sarah, dear, Margaret finally said, her voice carefully controlled. That sounds quite serious. It is. And Margaret? Could you ask Robert not to mention this to David yet? I think it would be better coming from you, after you've heard everything. Of course. Shall we say 2 o'clock? After I hung up, I sat staring at the folder full of evidence, wondering if I was about to cross a line I could never uncross. Then I remembered his laugh when he talked about our dead baby. 2 o'clock couldn't come soon enough. The Whitmore family estate sits behind iron gates that probably cost more than most people's cars. As I pulled up the circular driveway at exactly 1:58 p.m., I caught sight of Margaret watching me from the front window. She disappeared immediately, which somehow felt more ominous than reassuring. Robert answered the door himself, no housekeeper, no butler. That was my first sign that they were taking this seriously. He looked older than I remembered, more fragile, and when he smiled it didn't reach his eyes. Sarah, sweetheart. Come in, come in. Margaret was waiting in the sitting room, perched on the edge of her usual chair like she was preparing for battle. The tea service was laid out perfectly, but I noticed her hands trembling slightly as she poured. You sounded quite distressed on the phone, she began, passing me a delicate china cup. Robert and I have been worried. I'd rehearsed this moment a dozen times during the drive over, but now, sitting in their pristine living room surrounded by family portraits that included me and David looking blissfully happy, the words stuck in my throat. I need to tell you some things about David, I finally managed. Things I should have told you years ago, but I thought. I hoped. Robert leaned forward. Has he hurt you? Because if David has laid a hand on you. Not physically, I said quickly. But there are things you don't know. Things he's been hiding from all of us. I opened the folder I'd brought and spread the first bank statement on the coffee table between us. David has been gambling. Heavily. For at least 3 years that I can prove. Margaret's teacup rattled against its saucer as she set it down. Gambling? Casino receipts, online poker accounts, sports betting. He's lost over $180,000 of our money. I showed them the credit card statements. Money he's borrowed against our house, our future, everything. Robert's face had gone pale. The investment portfolio he's been telling us about doesn't exist. These losses? I pointed to the highlighted entries. These happened on the same weekends he was supposed to be at financial planning seminars. But even as I spoke, I could see something in Margaret's expression that made my stomach drop. She was looking at the papers, yes, but not with the shock I'd expected. More like confirmation of something she'd already suspected. Sarah, she said carefully, how long have you known about this? The question caught me off guard. I've suspected for about a year, but I only confirmed it this weekend when you what? I hesitated. Telling them about the gambling and the lies was one thing. But admitting I'd been spying, that I'd overheard their son mocking me and planning to divorce me once he got his inheritance? That felt like revealing too much of my own hand. When I found some receipts, I said instead. But there's more. I showed them the text messages about the prenup, about his plan to upgrade wives. Margaret actually gasped at that one. But it was Robert's reaction that surprised me most. He stood abruptly and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. Robert? Margaret's voice was small. When he turned around, his expression was grim. There's something we need to tell you, Sarah. Something about David that we've been hoping he would outgrow. My heart started pounding. What do you mean? Margaret and Robert exchanged a look that seemed to communicate volumes. This isn't the first time, Margaret whispered. The gambling, the lying, She gestured at the papers, the complete disregard for consequences. We thought marriage might settle him, that having you in his life might. She trailed off, but the implication hung in the air like a toxic cloud. They'd known. They'd known David was like this, and they'd let me marry him anyway. The folder in my lap suddenly felt like evidence of my own stupidity rather than his betrayal. How long? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. How long have you known what he's really like? Robert returned to his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 73 years. Sarah, David has always been challenging. Even as a child, he had a tendency to manipulate situations to his advantage. Manipulate how? Margaret fidgeted with her pearl necklace. Small things at first. Blaming his brother for broken items, lying about his grades, taking money from my purse and swearing he hadn't touched it. We thought it was normal childhood behavior. But it escalated, Robert continued grimly. In college, he was caught cheating on exams. Twice. The second time, he convinced us that his professor had a vendetta against him, that the evidence was fabricated. We hired lawyers, donated money to the university. He shook his head. $20,000 to make that go away. My coffee had gone cold, but I gripped the cup anyway, needing something to anchor me. What else? His first job out of college, Margaret said softly. He was fired for falsifying expense reports. Again, he had a story, his boss was threatened by his performance, the company was looking for a scapegoat. We believed him because we wanted to believe him. You've been enabling him for years. The accusation slipped out before I could stop it. Robert's jaw tightened. We'd been hoping that with the right motivation, he could change. That's why when you two started dating seriously, we were so relieved. You seem to have such a positive influence on him. A positive influence? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. He's been lying to me about everything. He got a vasectomy consultation while I was blaming myself for not getting pregnant. He calls me his ball and chain to his friends. He told his brother my miscarriage was a blessing because I'm too emotional and we can't afford kids anyway. The color drained completely from Margaret's face. He said that about your miscarriage? I nodded, not trusting my voice. Robert stood up so abruptly his chair rocked backward. That bastard. Robert. Margaret gasped. No, Margaret. No more excuses. What he said about Sarah, about their baby. He turned to me, his eyes blazing with an anger I'd never seen before. Sarah, I am so deeply sorry. We hoped marriage and love might mature him, but clearly we were wrong. There's something else, I said quietly. I pulled out the printed screenshots of David's texts about the inheritance, about faking devotion until his parents died so he could access their money. Margaret read in silence, her hand pressed to her mouth. When she finished, she carefully set the papers down and walked to the liquor cabinet, pouring herself 3 fingers of something amber. 34 years old, she whispered to no one in particular. 34 years old and still treating people like chess pieces. Robert was reading the texts now, his face growing darker with each line. He thinks we're idiots. He actually thinks we don't see through his performance. The will, Margaret said suddenly, turning around. Robert, he knows about the inheritance provisions. Look. She pointed to one of the messages. He's been planning this entire charade around getting our money. A terrible silence settled over the room. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, marking seconds that felt like they were sealing David's fate. What are you going to do? I asked. Margaret and Robert looked at each other again, and I saw something pass between them that made my stomach clench with sudden doubt. Sarah, Robert said carefully, what exactly are you hoping to accomplish by telling us this? The question hit me like cold water. What was I hoping to accomplish? The question hung in the air like smoke, and I realized I didn't have a clean answer. What was I hoping to accomplish? I wanted you to know the truth, I said finally. I thought you deserved to know who your son really is. But even as I said it, I could hear how hollow it sounded. Because sitting there in their perfectly appointed living room, surrounded by evidence of David's betrayal, I was forced to confront my real motivation. I wanted him to hurt the way he'd hurt me. Robert's eyes were studying me with an intensity that made me squirm. Sarah, in all the years you've been married to our son, have you ever once come to us about his behavior? His gambling, his lies, any of it? I thought I could handle it. I thought he might change. But you didn't come to us when you first suspected the gambling a year ago, Margaret added, her voice gentler but no less probing. You didn't come to us when you found the first casino receipts. You're here now, after overhearing him say those horrible things about you. About your loss. The implication was clear, and shame burned in my chest. They weren't wrong. You're angry, Robert continued. You have every right to be angry. But Sarah, what you're asking us to do, cutting David off financially, removing him from the will, that's not just punishment. That's scorched earth. Maybe that's what he deserves, I shot back, then immediately regretted the venom in my voice. Margaret sat back down, her drink still untouched. Tell me honestly, if David came home tonight, got down on his knees, and begged for forgiveness, promised to get help for the gambling, swore he'd never speak about you that way again, would you forgive him? The question caught me completely off guard. I opened my mouth to say no, absolutely not, never, but the word wouldn't come. I don't know, I whispered. Because if there's any part of you that thinks this marriage could be salvaged, Robert said carefully, then what you're asking us to do could make that impossible. David's pride, his sense of identity, so much of it is tied up in being our heir, in the financial security our family provides. If we cut him off, he'll know it came from you, Margaret finished. And he'll never forgive you for it. I stared down at the evidence spread across their coffee table. Bank statements, text messages, receipts, a paper trail of betrayal and lies. But Margaret was right. If they disinherited David now, he'd know exactly who was responsible. There would be no coming back from that. Are you prepared for that level of retaliation? Robert asked quietly. Because our son, when David feels cornered, when he feels like he's been made to look foolish, he can be vindictive in ways that might surprise you. Something cold crawled up my spine. What do you mean? Margaret and Robert exchanged another look, and I was beginning to hate those silent conversations they seemed to have. Kevin's first wife, Margaret said reluctantly. When she tried to leave him, this was years ago, before you knew our family, David helped Kevin hide assets, coached him on how to make her look unstable in court. She ended up with almost nothing in the divorce. He was protecting his brother, I said weakly. He was protecting the family money, Robert corrected. And Sarah, you have to understand, if we disinherit David, if we strip away his financial safety net based on evidence you brought us, you won't just be his ex-wife. You'll be the woman who cost him millions. The grandfather clock chimed 3 times, and I realized I'd been sitting there for over an hour, slowly watching my plan crumble under the weight of consequences I hadn't considered. But then I remembered his laugh. His casual dismissal of our dead baby. His plans to upgrade to a better wife once he secured his inheritance. Maybe I wasn't prepared for war. But maybe it was time to find out. You're right, I said finally, looking directly at Robert. I'm not just here to inform you. I'm here because I want David to face real consequences for once in his life. The admission hung between us like a confession. But there's something else you need to know before you decide anything. I reached into my folder and pulled out the last batch of documents, the ones I'd been saving. The gambling isn't just David's personal problem anymore. It's become your problem too. Margaret frowned. What do you mean? 3 weeks ago, David took out a loan. I slid the paperwork across the table. A secured loan, using your family trust as collateral. The silence that followed was deafening. Robert's face went through several color changes as he read, finally settling on a dangerous shade of red. That's impossible, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. David doesn't have access to. Check the signatures, I interrupted. He's been forging your name on documents for months. The loan officer apparently never thought to verify because everyone knows the Whitmore family, and David was so confident, so charming. Margaret's drink finally made it to her lips, and she drained half of it in one gulp. How much? 300,000. At 14% interest. I watched their faces carefully. It was supposed to be his big comeback play, a sure-thing sports bet that would pay off the casino debts and give him a clean slate. Supposed to be? Robert's voice was dangerously quiet. The Lakers didn't cover the spread. The antique lamp on the side table flickered as if the house itself was reacting to the revelation. Margaret set down her glass with shaking hands. So not only has David stolen from his own family, she said slowly, but he's put our estate at legal risk. It gets worse. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a recording app. I started documenting things after I found the loan papers. This is from yesterday morning. I hit play. David's voice filled the room, tinny through the phone speaker but unmistakably clear. Jake, I'm telling you, they'll never find out about the trust thing. The old man barely reads what he signs anymore, and my mom trusts me completely. By the time they realize what happened, I'll have won it all back and paid off the loan. They'll never know how close they came to losing everything. Margaret made it sound like she'd been punched. And if I can't win it back, David's recorded voice continued, well, that's what bankruptcy lawyers are for, right? The trust protects most of the assets anyway, and Sarah will probably stick around through a financial rough patch. She's too insecure to leave. I stopped the recording. The silence stretched until the grandfather clock chimed again, marking another quarter hour. Robert stood up and walked to his desk in the corner, pulling out a leather-bound folder. His movements were precise, controlled, but I could see the fury in the rigid line of his shoulders. Margaret, call Harrison, he said without turning around. Harrison was their lawyer. Tell him we need to see him first thing tomorrow morning. Robert, what are you thinking? He turned back to us, and for the first time since I'd known him, Robert Whitmore looked every inch the ruthless businessman who built a financial empire. I'm thinking that our son has committed fraud. Against his own family. He looked directly at me. Sarah, I need you to understand something. What you brought us today, this isn't just about David's character flaws anymore. He's committed actual crimes. My mouth went dry. Crimes? Forgery, fraud, theft by deception. If we wanted to, we could have him arrested. Margaret stood up abruptly. We're not having our son arrested, Robert. Aren't we? He gestured at the papers scattered across the coffee table. How is this different from a stranger doing the same thing? Because he shares our DNA? The fight that erupted between them was swift and vicious, 30 years of disagreements about David's behavior finally boiling over. I sat frozen, clutching my phone, realizing that I'd just lit a fuse I couldn't extinguish. Outside, I heard a car door slam. David was home early. The sound of David's key in the front door cut through Margaret and Robert's argument like a blade. We all froze, staring at each other in horror as his familiar whistle echoed from the foyer. Mom? Dad? I saw Sarah's car in the driveway. His voice was cheerful, completely oblivious. What's the family meeting about? Margaret swept the documents off the coffee table with one frantic motion, shoving them behind a couch cushion. Robert grabbed my phone, the one with the recording still queued up, and slipped it into his jacket pocket. But the loan papers were still scattered on his desk across the room, clearly visible. In here, sweetheart. Margaret called out, her voice only slightly strained. She shot me a look that clearly said follow my lead. David appeared in the doorway, still in his golf clothes, grinning that easy smile that had charmed me for 5 years. Seeing him now, knowing what I knew, was like looking at a perfectly crafted mask. Well, this is cozy, he said, crossing to kiss my cheek. What's the occasion? Sarah was just updating us on her work situation, Robert said smoothly, moving subtly to block David's view of the desk. That promotion she's been hoping for. I hadn't mentioned any promotion, but I nodded anyway. Just exploring some new opportunities. David's arm slipped around my shoulders in what would have looked like a supportive gesture to anyone who hadn't heard him call me his ball and chain 2 days ago. That's great, babe. You deserve to move up. The casual lie rolled off his tongue so effortlessly. Even now, even with his parents watching his every move, he was performing. David, how was your golf game? Margaret asked, but there was something different in her voice. A new wariness that I prayed he wouldn't notice. Fantastic. Shot an 86, which is practically professional for me. He squeezed me tighter. Jake was asking about when we might start thinking about kids again. I told him we're just taking things as they come, no pressure. My stomach turned. I felt Margaret tense beside me. Jake asks a lot of questions, Robert observed carefully. You know how he is. Always curious about everyone else's business. David laughed, but I caught something in his expression, a flicker of uncertainty. Speaking of which, he mentioned something weird. Said he heard Mom and Dad might be updating some financial stuff? Estate planning or something? The room went dead silent. I could hear my own heartbeat. Where would Jake hear something like that? Margaret's voice was dangerously quiet. David shrugged, but his arm around me had gone rigid. No idea. Probably just golf course gossip. You know how people talk. He looked around the room, and I saw the exact moment he noticed the tension. Everything okay in here? You all look a little serious. We're fine, son, Robert said, but he moved closer to his desk, partially concealing the loan documents with his body. David's eyes narrowed slightly. When he looked at me, something cold flickered behind his smile. Sarah, you seem upset about something. Everything all right with work? The question felt loaded, like he was testing whether I'd stick to Robert's cover story. The weight of his arm around my shoulders suddenly felt suffocating. I'm fine, I managed. Just tired. David's gaze moved between his parents and me, and I could practically see him calculating. Well, since we're all here, maybe this is a good time to discuss holiday plans. Sarah's been worried about money lately, haven't you, babe? The casual cruelty of bringing up our financial stress he'd caused, made my hands clench into fists. David, Margaret said sharply, that's hardly appropriate dinner conversation. But David wasn't looking at his mother anymore. He was staring directly at me with an expression I'd never seen before. You know what, Sarah, he said softly. Why don't you tell them about those papers you were looking through yesterday? The ones you thought I didn't see you hiding? My blood turned to ice. He knew. The accusation hung in the air like a sword about to drop. David's arm was still around my shoulders, but his fingers had tightened enough to hurt. Papers? I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. I don't know what you mean. His laugh was soft, almost fond, but his eyes were ice cold. Come on, sweetheart. We've been married 3 years. I know when you're lying. He looked at his parents, that charming smile never wavering. Sarah's been going through our financial records. Bank statements, credit card bills, really digging deep into everything. Margaret's face had gone pale, but she managed to speak. Well, that's what married couples do, isn't it? Share financial responsibilities? Of course, David agreed pleasantly. Except Sarah's been printing things out. Making copies. Almost like she was building some kind of file. His fingers pressed harder into my shoulder. Which got me thinking, why would my wife need copies of our private financial information? Robert had gone very still behind his desk. I could see him calculating, trying to figure out how much David actually knew versus how much he was guessing. Maybe you should ask Sarah directly if you're concerned, Robert said carefully. David's smile widened. Great idea, Dad. He turned to face me fully, both hands on my shoulders now, the picture of a concerned husband. Sarah, honey, is there something you want to tell me? Something you maybe wanted to discuss with my parents? The trap was closing around me, and I could see David enjoying every second of it. This was what Margaret and Robert had warned me about, David when he felt cornered, when he suspected he was being outmaneuvered. I think you're being paranoid, I said, but my voice came out thinner than I'd intended. Am I? He tilted his head, studying my face like he was solving a puzzle. Because Jake also mentioned something interesting today. Said he got a weird call yesterday from someone asking about my credit history. Someone claiming to be from our bank, wanting to verify some information. My stomach dropped. I had called to confirm details about the secured loan, but I'd been so careful. The thing is, David continued conversationally, when Jake called the bank back, they had no record of anyone making that inquiry. Isn't that strange? Margaret stood up abruptly. David, I think you're making Sarah uncomfortable. Am I? He looked genuinely surprised, but there was venom underneath the performance. I'm just trying to understand why my wife has been investigating our finances and making mysterious phone calls. Unless. His expression shifted to mock realization. Unless she's thinking about divorce? The word hit the room like a bomb. Robert actually stepped forward. Son, that's enough. But David was on a roll now, the mask slipping completely. Is that what this little family meeting is about? Sarah's here to tell you she's leaving me, and she wants to make sure she gets her fair share? He laughed, but there was nothing warm about it. Honey, did you forget about the prenup? Or did you think Mom and Dad might take your side? David. Margaret's voice cracked like a whip. Stop talking. Right now. Something in her tone finally penetrated his performance. David looked at his mother, really looked at her, and for the first time since he'd walked in, seemed to notice the tension radiating from both his parents. What's going on here? He asked quietly, and for a moment he sounded like the confused boy he might have been once, before years of lies and manipulation had calcified into his personality. That's when Robert made the decision that would change everything. He stepped aside, revealing the loan documents scattered across his desk. David's face went through a series of expressions, confusion, recognition, and finally, pure panic. Dad, I can explain. Can you? Robert's voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. Can you explain why your forged signature is on a $300,000 loan against our family trust? The silence that followed was absolute. David looked at me, at his parents, at the papers on the desk, and I watched him realize that his carefully constructed world was collapsing in real time. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. How long have you known? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. David's face had gone completely white, and I could see his hands trembling at his sides. How long, David? Robert repeated, his voice deadly calm. How long have we known that our son is a thief and a liar? David's eyes darted between his parents and me, and I watched him shift into damage control mode. The panic disappeared, replaced by that familiar calculating expression I was beginning to recognize as his true face. Okay, yes, I borrowed against the trust, he said, straightening up and adopting a tone of wounded dignity. But it was temporary. I was going to pay it back before you ever found out. With what money? Margaret's voice was ice. The money you lost gambling? David's jaw tightened. I had a system. I was working with a professional consultant, someone who really understands the odds. You had a gambling addiction, Robert interrupted. There's a difference. I don't have an addiction, David snapped, and for the first time his composure cracked completely. I had some bad luck, okay? But I was handling it. I didn't need Sarah running to you like some tattletale child. The venom in his voice when he said my name made me flinch. Margaret noticed. David, you will not speak about your wife that way. My wife? He laughed harshly. My wife has been building a case against me for months. Going through our private documents, calling banks, probably talking to lawyers. He whirled to face me. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? Did you think I was that stupid? I think you're exactly that arrogant, I said quietly, and his face flushed red. You know what I think? David stepped closer to me, and I instinctively backed toward Robert. I think you've been planning this whole thing. The mysterious family meeting, the convenient timing right after Dad mentioned updating the will. You're trying to poison them against me so you can get a better divorce settlement. David, that's enough. Robert moved between us, but David wasn't finished. No, let me guess how this went. Poor little Sarah, so hurt by her terrible husband. He gambles, he lies, he doesn't appreciate me. His voice shifted into a cruel mockery of mine. Did you tell them about how you constantly nag me about money? About how you check my phone and go through my pockets like some paranoid psycho? I check your pockets because I keep finding casino receipts. The words exploded out of me before I could stop them. There it is. David pointed at me triumphantly. See? She admits it. She's been spying on me, violating my privacy, building her little dossier. He turned to his parents. And you're going to take her word over mine? Margaret stood up, her face flushed with anger I'd never seen before. David Michael Whitmore, your word forged your father's signature on legal documents. Your word stole $300,000 from our family. Your word is worthless. The use of his full name seemed to hit David like a physical blow. For a moment, he looked genuinely stricken. Mom, please. You don't understand the pressure I've been under. Sarah's been talking about wanting kids again, wanting a bigger house, wanting me to be something I'm not. His voice cracked slightly. I was trying to fix everything before it got worse. By stealing from us? Robert's voice was incredulous. By borrowing. David shouted. It was supposed to be borrowing. I had it all figured out. You had nothing figured out, Margaret said quietly. You never do. You just make bigger and bigger messes and expect other people to clean them up. David stared at his mother like she'd slapped him. That's not. I don't. When was the last time you told us the truth about anything? She continued. Your job, your finances, your marriage, your plans. When was the last time you were honest with us? David opened his mouth, then closed it again. I could see him cycling through responses, trying to find the right combination of words to regain control of the situation. That's when Robert walked to his desk and picked up the phone. Who are you calling? David's voice pitched higher. Our lawyer, Robert said calmly. We need to discuss our legal options regarding the loan fraud. David's face went ashen. Dad, no. Please. We can work this out as a family. But Robert was already dialing, and I realized there was no going back from this moment. Everything was about to change forever. The phone call to the lawyer lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. I know because I watched the antique clock on the mantel tick through every single one of them while David stood frozen in the center of the room, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. When Robert hung up, the silence was deafening. Harrison will see us tomorrow morning at 9, he announced, his voice businesslike. He's already started paperwork to freeze the trust accounts and investigate the loan. David's legs seemed to give out. He sank into the nearest chair, his head in his hands. Dad, please. You don't have to involve lawyers. I'll figure out a way to pay it back. With what money, David? Margaret's voice was flat. You've already proven you can't be trusted with financial decisions. I'll get a second job. I'll sell the car, You'll what? Robert interrupted. Sell the car that's leased under our business account? Pawn your watch that we bought you? Everything you think you own is somehow connected to family money. The truth of that statement seemed to hit David like a physical blow. I watched him realize, maybe for the first time, how completely dependent he'd become on his parents' wealth. What about the house? He asked desperately, looking at me. Sarah, we can sell the house. I almost laughed. The house that's mortgaged to the hilt because of your gambling debts? The house where you've been hiding casino receipts and loan documents? That house? David's face crumpled. Sarah, please. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling. I can get help for the gambling. When? I asked quietly. When exactly were you planning to get help? Before or after you forged more signatures? Before or after you told your brother our miscarriage was a blessing? Margaret gasped. He said what? David's head snapped up, his eyes wide with panic. Sarah, that's not. You're taking that out of context. What context makes joking about our dead baby acceptable, David? The room went dead silent. Robert slowly turned to face his son, his expression darker than I'd ever seen it. You made jokes about Sarah's miscarriage? Dad, I was drunk. I was with the guys. I said stupid things. What kind of stupid things? Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. David looked desperately between his parents and me, realizing he was trapped. I said it was probably for the best given our financial situation. I didn't mean. You said it was a blessing because I'm too emotional, I corrected, my voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. You said you were relieved because you couldn't deal with me being more needy. Margaret made a sound like she was choking. Robert's hands clenched into fists at his sides. And then, I continued, you laughed about how your parents had no idea what I was really like. How you were just pretending to be a good husband until they died so you could inherit their money. David went completely white. You recorded me. It wasn't a question. Somehow, impossibly, he'd figured it out. Yes, I said simply. I recorded you. The admission hung in the air like a bomb with the pin pulled. David stared at me with an expression of pure hatred that made my blood run cold. You manipulative bitch, he whispered, and Margaret actually gasped. But David wasn't finished. He stood up slowly, his eyes never leaving mine, and when he smiled, there was nothing human in it. You want to play dirty, Sarah? Fine. Let's see how you feel when I tell everyone about your little prescription problem. My stomach dropped. He wouldn't. He couldn't. But from the triumph in his eyes, I realized David had been saving ammunition of his own. The prescription comment hit me like a physical blow. I felt the blood drain from my face as David's smile widened, sensing he found his weapon. What prescription problem? Margaret asked slowly, her eyes moving between us. Oh, Sarah didn't tell you? David's voice dripped with false concern. About the Xanax she's been taking? The pills she gets from 3 different doctors because one prescription isn't enough? David, stop. My voice came out as barely a whisper. She's been doctor shopping for months, Mom. Different clinics, fake symptoms, building up quite the collection. He tilted his head, studying my face with satisfaction. Did you really think I didn't know about your little hiding spot behind the bathroom mirror? The room started spinning. The anti-anxiety medication I'd been prescribed after the miscarriage, when I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't function, had become something I relied on more than I should have. But I wasn't doctor shopping. I wasn't. That's not true, I managed, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. Isn't it? David pulled out his phone, scrolling through something. Because I have photos of pill bottles with different doctors' names, different dates. Want to see them? Robert stepped closer. David, what exactly are you accusing Sarah of? I'm not accusing her of anything, Dad. I'm just wondering how her credibility holds up when she's been illegally obtaining controlled substances. David's voice was calm, reasonable, deadly. Makes you wonder what else she might lie about, doesn't it? Margaret was staring at me with a mixture of concern and confusion. Sarah, is this true? After the miscarriage, I was having panic attacks. My doctor prescribed Xanax, but when that ran out, I stopped, realizing how it sounded. I went to a clinic when Dr. Morrison was out of town. I just needed something to help me sleep. Once. David pressed. Or multiple times? The truth was it had been 3 times over 6 months. 3 different urgent care centers when my anxiety got so bad I couldn't function. Each time I told myself it was temporary, just until I could get back to my regular doctor. 3 times, I whispered. David's smile was triumphant. 3 documented cases of prescription fraud. That's a felony, isn't it, Dad? Robert's expression was unreadable. David, stop attacking your wife and focus on your own problems. My problems? David laughed harshly. My problems are that I trusted someone who's been lying just as much as she claims I have. The difference is, my lies didn't break federal law. Your lies involved forging our signatures, Margaret said sharply, but I could hear the uncertainty creeping into her voice. Financial mistakes versus drug-seeking behavior, David countered smoothly. Which one sounds more serious to you? I felt the room shifting around me. David had just turned my moment of desperate grief, the months after losing our baby when I could barely get out of bed, into ammunition against me. That's not the same thing, I said, but even I could hear how defensive I sounded. Isn't it? We're both guilty of deception, Sarah. The question is whether Mom and Dad want to get involved in either of our legal problems. David looked directly at his parents. Or maybe we should all just handle this privately, as a family. The trap was perfect. He just made himself and me equally culpable, turning his financial crimes into relationship problems rather than legal ones. Robert and Margaret exchanged another look, and I realized with growing horror that David's strategy was working. Maybe, Margaret said slowly, we should all take some time to think about the situation before making any hasty decisions. David's smile widened. He was winning. The victory in David's eyes made something snap inside me. He thought he'd cornered me, thought he'd found the perfect way to neutralize everything I'd exposed about him. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd threatened me in front of his parents. You know what, David? I said, standing up slowly. You're absolutely right. I did get prescription medication from multiple doctors after our baby died. I looked directly at Margaret and Robert. I was having panic attacks so severe I couldn't drive to work. I was sleeping 2 hours a night, losing weight, barely functional. And when my regular doctor couldn't see me for 2 weeks, I went to urgent care. David's smile faltered slightly. But here's the difference between my desperate grief and your calculated theft, I continued, my voice getting stronger. I never forged anyone's signature. I never stole from people who loved me. And I never, ever made jokes about your pain to entertain my friends. Sarah, David started, but I wasn't finished. You want to talk about my 3 urgent care visits? Let's talk about your 37 casino visits in the last 6 months. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to the evidence I'd compiled. Let's talk about the fact that you've been planning to divorce me since before we even tried to have another baby. Margaret's face went pale. What do you mean, planning to divorce her? David shot me a warning look, but I was past caring about his threats. Show them the text, David. The one where you told Jake the prenup was genius because when you're ready to upgrade, I get nothing. That was taken out of context. Or the one where you said you were getting a vasectomy consultation while I was blaming myself for not getting pregnant. My voice cracked slightly. I spent 8 months thinking something was wrong with my body, David. 8 months of fertility tests and hormone treatments and crying in doctors' offices, while you were secretly making sure we could never have children. The silence that followed was absolute. Margaret was staring at her son like she'd never seen him before. You got a vasectomy? She whispered. I got a consultation, David said quickly. I was just exploring options. Given our financial stress, I thought. You thought you'd make that decision unilaterally? Robert's voice was dangerously quiet. While your wife was grieving and desperate to try again? David's composure was finally starting to crack. Dad, you don't understand the pressure I was under. Sarah was talking about babies constantly, and we couldn't afford. We couldn't afford it because you were gambling away our savings. I shouted, finally losing control. I was working overtime to pay for fertility treatments while you were spending our mortgage money at poker tables. I was trying to win enough to pay for everything. David shouted back. I was trying to fix our problems. By lying to everyone who loved you. Because the truth would have disappointed everyone. The admission hung in the air like a confession. David seemed to realize what he'd said, his face going white. Robert walked slowly to his desk and picked up the loan documents again, studying them with new eyes. 34 years old, he said quietly, and you still think lying is easier than facing consequences. Dad, please. No. Robert's voice cut through David's pleading like steel. Margaret, call Harrison back. Tell him we need to discuss removing David from the will entirely. David's face crumpled. You can't. I'm your son. You're a stranger who shares our DNA, Margaret said, her voice breaking. The son I thought I knew wouldn't have done any of this. And that's when David played his final, desperate card. If you cut me off, he said quietly, I'll make sure Sarah never sees a penny in the divorce. I'll drag her through court for years. I'll make her prescription issue public record. I'll destroy her the way she's trying to destroy me. The threat hung in the air like poison. Robert and Margaret stared at their son, and I watched them realize exactly what kind of man they'd raised. The threat hung in the air like poison gas, and I watched Robert's face transform into something I'd never seen before. When he spoke, his voice was so quiet it was almost a whisper. David, did you just threaten to destroy your wife in front of us? I'm just explaining the reality of the situation, David said, but his voice had lost its confident edge. If you force me into a corner, I'll have to protect myself. Margaret stood up slowly, her hands trembling. Protect yourself? By hurting Sarah? By using every legal option available to me, David clarified, but we all knew what he meant. That's when my phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number, Mrs. Whitmore? This is Detective Morrison from the Financial Crimes Unit. We need to speak with you regarding fraudulent loan applications. Can you come in tomorrow morning? Asterisk. The blood drained from my face. David saw my expression and grabbed for my phone, but I pulled it away. What is it? Robert demanded. The police, I whispered, showing them the message. They want to talk to me about the loan fraud. David went completely white. How did they? Who called the police? We all turned to stare at him, and I saw the exact moment he realized his mistake. In his panic about being discovered, he just confirmed his guilt. The bank, Robert said slowly, understanding dawning on his face. When they discovered the forged signatures, they were legally required to report it. This is beyond our family now, Margaret whispered, sinking back into her chair. This is a criminal investigation. David started pacing, his hands running through his hair frantically. Okay, this is manageable. Sarah, you tell them it was a misunderstanding. That I had permission to sign Dad's name. You're my wife, you can. I can what? I interrupted. Lie to police officers? Commit perjury to protect you? Yes. David spun around to face me, his mask completely gone now. Yes, that's exactly what you can do. That's what wives do for their husbands. Like you did for me when I was struggling after our miscarriage? The words came out colder than I intended. When you told everyone it was a blessing? David's face twisted with frustration. That was different. I was venting to friends. You were mocking my grief. I was coping with stress. By planning to leave me. Because you were suffocating me. The words exploded out of him before he could stop them, and the room went dead silent. Margaret actually gasped. Suffocating you? I repeated quietly. David seemed to realize he'd crossed another line, but it was too late to take it back. Sarah, I didn't mean. No, please, explain. How was grieving our dead baby suffocating to you? You changed after the miscarriage. You became this sad, anxious person who needed constant reassurance, and I couldn't handle it anymore. The honesty was brutal and somehow worse than all the lies. This was who David really was, someone who saw his wife's trauma as an inconvenience. So you decided to have a vasectomy consultation instead of suggesting couples therapy, I said. I decided to be practical about our situation. You decided to take away my choice about having children. I decided to prevent us from bringing kids into a mess. Robert slammed his hand down on the desk so hard we all jumped. Stop. Both of you, just stop. But David wasn't finished. He turned to his parents with desperate eyes. Don't you see what she's doing? She's making me the villain here, but she's just as manipulative. The recording, the secret investigation, getting you involved, this is all calculated revenge because she found out I was unhappy. Margaret looked at her son with something that might have been pity. David, she said softly, do you hear yourself right now? I hear someone trying to save his marriage and his family from making a terrible mistake. No, Margaret said, standing up. I hear someone who's never once, in this entire conversation, apologized for anything he's done. The observation hung in the air like a revelation, and I realized she was right. Not once had David said he was sorry. The observation hit like a thunderbolt. In over 2 hours of devastating revelations, the gambling, the forged signatures, the cruel mockery of our miscarriage, David hadn't offered a single genuine apology. That's not. David started, then stopped, his mouth opening and closing as he seemed to cycle through responses. I mean, obviously I'm sorry that things got this complicated. Complicated? Margaret's voice was ice. Is that what you call fraud and emotional abuse? Complicated? My phone buzzed again. Another text from Detective Morrison, *, we also need to discuss some casino transactions that may be connected to money laundering. Please bring any financial records you have. *. Money laundering. The words made my stomach drop into my shoes. David, I said slowly, what exactly were you doing at those casinos? Because the police are asking about money laundering now. His face went ashen. That's not. I was just gambling normally. But something in his expression told me there was more. Robert must have seen it too, because he stepped closer to his son. David. What aren't you telling us? Nothing. I don't know why they'd ask about money laundering. I was just playing poker and betting on sports. With whose money? I pressed, a horrible suspicion forming in my mind. David, where exactly did the $300,000 from the loan go? To pay off debts, I told you. Which debts? Because I've seen our credit card statements, and they're still maxed out. I've seen the casino receipts, and they don't add up to anywhere near that amount. David's eyes darted toward the door like he was calculating escape routes. Some of it went to private loans. People you don't know. What people? Robert's voice had gone dangerously quiet. Just, guys I met through poker. They front money sometimes when you're having a bad run. Margaret sat down heavily. David, please tell me you didn't borrow money from loan sharks. The silence stretched until the grandfather clock chimed, and David's non-answer became an answer itself. Oh my God, Margaret whispered. David, how much do you owe these people? It's under control, David said quickly, but sweat was beading on his forehead. They're reasonable guys, they understand the situation. My phone rang. Unknown number. Without thinking, I answered it. Mrs. Whitmore? This is Detective Morrison. We need you to come in tonight, not tomorrow. We have reason to believe your husband may be in immediate danger. The blood roared in my ears. Danger from who? We can't discuss details over the phone, but we've received information that suggests your husband owes money to some very dangerous people. People who might use violence to collect. I looked up to find everyone staring at me. David's face had gone completely white. How much? Robert demanded, having heard enough of the conversation to understand the situation. David's voice was barely a whisper. 200,000. 200,000 to loan sharks? Margaret looked like she might faint. David, what have you done? Plus interest, David added miserably. It compounds weekly. The room spun around me as the full scope of David's deception finally became clear. This wasn't just about gambling addiction or even marriage problems anymore. My husband had put our entire family in physical danger. And somehow, I was the one who had to figure out how to save us all. The police station felt surreal at 11 p.m., fluorescent lights buzzing overhead while Detective Morrison laid out photos of David's financial crimes like he was dealing cards. Bank records, casino surveillance footage, loan documents, 3 years of deception spread across a metal table. Your husband owes money to the Kozlov organization, Detective Morrison explained, his voice matter of fact. They're not the type to accept payment plans. Robert, who had insisted on coming with me, studied the photos with the same intensity he'd once used to build his business empire. What are our options? Well, Mr. Whitmore, your son has committed multiple felonies. But given the circumstances, we might be able to work out a cooperation agreement in exchange for witness protection assistance. David wasn't with us. He'd collapsed completely when the detective called, admitting through tears that men had been following him for weeks. Margaret had stayed home with him, probably the first time she'd comforted her son without making excuses for him. What kind of cooperation? I asked. The casino where your husband played most frequently is under federal investigation. His transactions might be connected to a larger money laundering operation. Detective Morrison leaned forward. If David testifies about what he witnessed, what he participated in, we can offer protection. Robert's jaw tightened. And if he doesn't? Then he's on his own with the Kozlovs. And frankly, Mrs. Whitmore, that puts you in danger too. The weight of that statement settled over me like a blanket of ice. Even leaving David wouldn't guarantee my safety now. My phone buzzed. A text from Margaret, *, David wants to talk to you. He's ready to tell the truth about everything. *. 2 hours later, I sat in the Whitmore's living room listening to my husband confess to crimes I couldn't have imagined. Money laundering, yes, but also serving as a go-between for other wealthy gamblers who wanted to hide losses from their families. David had been running a side business, essentially, helping rich men lie about their debts in exchange for a cut of their laundered money. I thought I was smart, David said, his voice hollow. I thought I could play both sides and come out ahead. Instead, you put Sarah's life in danger, Robert said quietly. For the first time in our entire marriage, David looked directly at me and spoke words that sounded genuine. Sarah, I'm so sorry. For all of it. The gambling, the lies about the baby, the vasectomy plan, everything. You deserved better than me. It should have felt like vindication. Instead, I just felt tired. The detective says if you cooperate fully, testify about the money laundering, they can relocate us both until the trial, I said. David nodded miserably. But we'd lose everything. The house, our life here, any chance of. Of what? Fixing our marriage? I shook my head. David, our marriage ended the moment you laughed about our miscarriage. I know, he whispered. 3 months later, I signed divorce papers in a lawyer's office in Portland, Oregon, where the Witness Protection Program had relocated us. David was in a different city, preparing to testify. The Kozlov organization had been dismantled, but David would serve 2 years for his financial crimes. The Whitmores had quietly removed David from their will, but they'd set up a small trust for me, enough to restart my life somewhere safe. You tried to warn us, Margaret had said during our last phone call. You tried to save our family, even when it meant destroying your own marriage. I kept thinking about that as I walked through my new city, breathing air that tasted like freedom. I hadn't destroyed David's life, his choices had done that. I'd simply refused to be destroyed along with him. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, *, hi, I saw your resume on the job board. Are you available for an interview this week? *. I smiled and typed back, *, yes. I'm ready to start over. *. For the first time in years, that felt completely true.